Did you know that Shigaraki once dreamed of becoming a hero? Or how Oboro Shirakumo transformed into Kurogiri? Well, today we're diving deep into the backstories of every villain in My Hero Academia. So, let's kick things off with the heartbreaking story of Kurogiri, who, as I said, was once Oboro Shirakumo. Being a student at UA, he quickly became best friends with Shota Aizawa and Hisashi Yamada. With his cloud quirk, Oboro was full of energy and constantly breaking the rules and causing mischief. However, he was also extremely talented. Later, he joined the Purple Revolution Agency for his work study alongside Shota. Out in the field, he was quick on his feet and a great team player, earning the love and admiration of pretty much everyone who met him. A week after going on patrol with Shota, Oboro and Shota were helping a group of kids through Tasumi Award, and Oboro told Shota he'd be great at working with kids, but Shota said it wasn't his thing. So Oboro's words became a big reason for Shota becoming a teacher later on. However, their conversation was interrupted when a powerful villain named Garve began causing chaos. Oboro used his cloud to shield the kids from falling rubble, but in doing so, he left himself vulnerable and was crushed by debris. After the battle with Garve, Shota discovered that Oboro had died when he saw his body, and he was of course devastated. After Oboro's death, his body was stolen by All for One, who gave it to Kyudai Garaki for experimentation. And Garaki revived Oboro as the Nomu Kurogiri, a loyal servant to Tomura Shigaraki. However, Kurogiri no longer remembers his past as Oboro Shirakumo. Now, let's talk about Kaina Tsutsumi, better known as Lady Nagant. She started off as this bright, hopeful girl who joined the Hero Public Safety Commission, dreaming of becoming an amazing pro-hero. After years of hard training, she completely mastered her rifle quirk and became one of Japan's top heroes and the best sniper in the country. But things weren't as happy as they seemed. The commission used her for shady, off-the-record missions, taking out villains and even corrupt heroes who threatened the system. At first, she went along with it, doing her job without question, but over time, the endless killings started to weigh on her, especially since she had to keep up her public image as a hero. Things really took a turn when some kids asked to shake her hand, and she hallucinated it dripping with blood. This really messed her up, making her question if she was nothing more than a pawn to maintain a fake, perfect-looking society. The final straw came when the commission's president told her to take out 2 corrupt heroes and threatened her when she hesitated. Pushed past her breaking point, she snapped and killed him. After that, she was arrested and thrown into the Tartarus prison. The commission covered up what really happened, claiming she killed another hero in an argument to protect their image and make her an example to other heroes. Next up, we've got Denjiro Tobita, aka Gentle Criminal. Denjiro always dreamed of being a legendary hero, so he joined a hero high school. But things didn't go well. His grades were awful, and he failed the Provisional Hero License exam 4 times. His school counselor eventually told him to quit, but he stayed positive and promised he'd keep trying. Unfortunately, his dream came crashing down after a failed rescue attempt. He tried to save a man who was falling, but ended up getting in a pro-hero's way, which caused the guy to get seriously hurt. This disaster led to fines, people harassing him, his family going broke, and eventually his expulsion from school. His parents disowned him, and Danjuro's dream of being a hero was dead, spending years just scraping by. At 22, Danjuro ran into an old classmate who'd become a successful pro-hero. When Danjuro tried to talk to him, the guy didn't even remember his name. And that moment crushed him. He realized he'd been forgotten, just another nobody. But refusing to let that be his story, he decided to become Gentle Criminal, a villain who would make a name for himself through flashy crimes posted online. Unfortunately, his stunts didn't get much attention, although they did reach Manami Aiba, later known as La Brava. So before we continue with Gentle's story, we have to talk about La Brava. Back in middle school, she wrote a heartfelt love letter to a boy she liked, but instead of accepting it, he laughed at her and called her a stalker. This rejection crushed her, and she fell into a deep depression, shutting herself away from the world, spending all her time on her computer, hacking into systems just for the thrill of it. But one day, everything changed when she stumbled across a video from Gentle Criminal. His passion for making the world a better place lit a spark in her, giving her a new sense of purpose. Determined to meet him, she used her hacking skills to track him down and introduced herself as his biggest fan. She begged to join him on his missions, and though Gentle was hesitant at first, he eventually gave in. However, she was self-conscious about the dark circles under her eyes, but when Gentle noticed, he just grabbed a marker and drew matching ones on himself, showing her he accepted her completely. When he officially made her his partner and gave her the codename La Brava, it was one of the happiest moments of her life, and Danjuro had also finally found purpose again. Next, we've got the hero killer stain, Chizome Akaguro. As a kid, Chizome looked up to All Might and dreamed of becoming a hero, even enrolling in a private hero course high school. But as he got older, he started to see how messed up the hero world really was. So many heroes were just in it for fame, money, or power. It completely shattered his view of what heroes should be. Feeling let down by the whole system, he dropped out of school and hit the streets as an activist, trying to push his idea of bringing back true heroism with his revival of heroics movement. Sadly, nobody really listened to him or cared about his protests. After years of getting nowhere, Chizome decided that peaceful protests weren't cutting it. He figured the only way to really make a difference was through action and violence. So he started training in martial arts to prepare himself. Chizome then took up the name Stendhal and became a vigilante, targeting villains to do what he thought the heroes were failing to do. But his brutal, no-nonsense methods clashed with other vigilantes who didn't agree with his extreme approach. After a fight with Knuckle Duster, who called him a mad slasher and criticized his methods, Chizome decided to drop his Stendhal persona for good. And, in a dramatic move, he cut off his broken nose, ditched his mask, and fully committed to his new mission, becoming the hero killer Stain. Now, let's talk about Gigantomachia. Machia used to be All For One's personal bodyguard, though nobody really knows for how long. But there is a theory that Machia is the bodyguard in this flashback sequence. Thanks to his endurance quirk, he could handle a bunch of quirks without straining his body, which made him the perfect unstoppable bodyguard. All For One even gave him 7 different quirks to make him practically unbeatable. When All For One realized his time was running out, he decided to hide Machia in the mountains, using his mole quirk to keep him hidden. Of course, that didn't last forever. Shigaraki eventually woke him up and brought him back into the action. Now we got to talk about Himiko Toga. Himiko was the oldest daughter in her family, and she had a strange and disturbing fascination with blood from a young age, probably because of her quirk Transform. One time, she brought a dead bird to her parents covered in blood and asked if it was pretty. This freaked them out, and they accused her of killing the bird and drinking its blood. Her parents tried to fix her by sending her to quirk counseling, pushing her to act normal, which made her hide her true nature. By middle school, she was seen as a cheerful, well-behaved girl. But even though she tried to hide her true self, Himiko's urges didn't go away. She began to question why people showed love the way they did, and why it felt so wrong for her to do the same. One day, after drinking a friend's blood to help with an injury, her parents confronted her, calling her inhuman and telling her she was a lost cause. Later, still in middle school, Himiko developed a crush on a boy named Saito, who got injured in a fight and was covered in blood. She wanted to express her feelings by drinking his blood, and eventually, she couldn't resist any longer. In a moment of impulse, she attacked him with a box cutter and drank his blood, overwhelmed with a sense of excitement. Afterward, she disappeared and her family publicly disowned her, calling her a demon. Himiko then became a suspect in multiple blood-related murders, but she managed to escape and eventually joined the League of Villains, staying one step ahead of both the police and heroes. Now, let's get into the story of Overhaul. Growing up in an orphanage run by Garaki, he came across a theory that quirks were caused by a virus. So young Kai became convinced that quirks were a kind of disease. Eventually, the boss of the Yakuza organization, Shiehase Kai, found Kai and took him in, raising him like a son. The boss tried to teach Kai the old ways of the Yakuza, honor and humanity, and even told him to avoid villainy and drugs. But Kai's obsession with paying back the boss for saving him made him go too far. He started working on quirk-related drugs, which the boss strongly opposed, especially when it involved Eri, the boss's granddaughter. Eri's quirk lets her rewind someone's genetics, and Kai realized her blood could suppress quirks completely. He came up with a plan: create bullets to destroy quirks and sell them to villains, then sell a serum to restore quirks to heroes at a high price. This would give the Yakuza control over both sides and bring them back to power. The boss refused, horrified by Kai's willingness to exploit Eri, and told him to abandon the plan or leave. Instead of listening, Kai put the boss into a coma, taking over the Shiehase Kai and rebranding himself as Overhaul. Next up, we have Getten, who came from the Himura family, the family of Shoto's mother, Rei. Rei Todoroki was in fact Rei Himura before marrying Endeavor. The Himura were a rich and proud family, but they fell apart when quirks became a big deal, so they started to sell their kids into marriages, which caused the family to break up, and Getten ended up on his own. Instead of going to school, Getten spent his time training to get better at controlling his ice powers. He then later joined the Meta Liberation Army, where Re-Destro helped him sharpen his skills. Now let's continue with Re-Destro's story. Rikiya Yotsubashi was the descendant of Destro, the founder of the Meta Liberation Army, but no one knew Rikiya was Destro's son. He was then adopted by the army's followers, who kept his true background hidden and raised him to eventually bring the Meta Liberation Army back to life. As an adult, Rikia became the CEO of Detnarat Company, using his power and resources to spread his ancestors' ideas and gather supporters, all while staying under the radar of the authorities. Later, after gathering enough support, he met with his followers and declared war on the League of Villains, all in the name of Destro. Moving on with the members of the League of Villains, we have Shuichi Iguchi, aka Spinner, who had a rough life growing up. Because of his lizard-like appearance, people treated him like a freak, and no matter what he did, nothing changed. He ended up shutting himself away, spending all his time playing video games and feeling empty. But things took a turn when he saw Stain's Last Stand on TV. Inspired by Stain's beliefs, Spinner decided he wanted to help change society and make the world a better place. So he joined the League of Villains, believing they would continue to follow Stain's legacy by wiping out false heroes. Now let's talk about Jin Bubaigawara, aka Twice. When he was in middle school, both of his parents were killed in a villain attack, leaving him an orphan. He eventually found work with a kind employer, but things took a turn when he accidentally hit someone with his motorbike. The victim survived with just a broken arm, and after explaining the situation to the police, Jin was let off with a warning. However, the victim turned out to be connected to one of Jin's boss's clients, which caused Jin to be fired and kicked out, leaving him homeless. Lonely and depressed, Jin started using his quirk to create clones of himself to have someone to talk to. Over time, he began using his clones for crimes like robberies and thefts, and later he became infamous as one of Japan's most wanted criminals. But things went wrong when he got lazy and let his clones do all the work, as they started to share his lazy personality. Eventually, the clones fought each other for dominance, leaving only one Jin alive, which made him wonder whether he was even the original or a clone. Later, Jin, now hiding his face with a paper bag, met Giran, who saw the potential in his quirk and encouraged him to join a group of people like himself. This eventually led Jin to become part of the League of Villains and become Twice. Atsuhiro Sako, better known as Mr. Compress, comes from a family with a legendary past. He's the great-great-grandson of Oji Harima, a famous thief who stole from corrupt heroes and gave back to the people, all while preaching about fixing society's flaws. Those values of fighting injustice and calling out hero society's problems were passed down to Atsuhiro. Before diving into the world of crime, he actually worked as an entertainer, using his natural charisma and love for theatrics, which he later brought into his life as a villain as he was recruited to the League of Villains. Moving on to Goto Imasuji, aka Muscular, whose past is unknown. Although we do know that 2 years before joining the League of Villains, he attacked a village and tried to kill the civilians. Trying to prevent a disaster, a hero duo called Waterhose, Koda's parents, stepped in to protect the villagers, but they ended up sacrificing their lives as Muscular killed both heroes, but not without a cost. He lost his left eye in the fight. One of the saddest backstories in the series is the story of Toya Todoroki, better known as Dabi. Wanting to create a child who could surpass All Might, Endeavor arranged a quirk marriage with Rei Himura. Their first child, Toya, was born with a fire quirk even stronger than Enji's own hell flame, so Enji pushed Toya hard, believing he could be the hero to fulfill his dream. But things took a turn when Toya's quirk started causing him severe burns, as his body couldn't handle the heat because he didn't have the essential frost quirk to cool him down. Despite this, Toya kept training on his own, refusing to give up on his dream of being a hero and making his father proud. Later, when Shoto was born with the perfect combination of quirks, Enji completely focused on him instead of Toya, which made him feel rejected and abandoned. His frustration built up, and during one of his dangerous training sessions, Toya's flames got out of control as he started crying uncontrollably because his father didn't show up to support him, causing a massive wildfire. He was believed to have been burnt alive, but he survived, jumping into a lake to extinguish the flames. Toya was then found by All For One, and he was in a coma for 3 years. When he woke up, he learned that he couldn't use his powers, and he then quickly escaped from All For One. He then returned home, where he found out his family had moved on, believing he had died. So with his body broken and his spirit shattered, Toya accepted his death and took on the name Dabi. Now, fueled by hatred for his father and the abandonment he felt, Dabi joined the League of Villains, inspired by the ideology of the hero-killer Stain. And over the years, he quietly planned his revenge, wanting to ruin Endeavor's career and destroy everything his father had worked for. Moving on to Tenko Shimura, who eventually became Tomura Shigaraki. As a kid, Tenko was obsessed with heroes, especially his grandmother, Nana Shimura, who was a legendary wielder of One For All. But his dad, Kotaro, absolutely hated heroes, and made Tenko's life miserable because of his admiration for them. He constantly yelled at and even hit Tenko to try to squash his love for heroes. While his mom and grandparents tried to show him some kindness, they never really stood up to Kotaro or stopped the abuse, leaving Tenko to fend for himself. One day, when Tenko was just 5 years old, he was left in the backyard as punishment by his father. When he was crying inconsolably, he hugged the family dog and told him how he couldn't take any more of the abuse, and how he hated everyone for leaving him to suffer at the hands of his father. That moment, a disaster happened, as his quirk, Decay, manifested, causing the family dog to fall apart in his hands. The next victim was his sister, and eventually he ended up annihilating his entire family, disintegrating them before his eyes. However, his father was still alive, and instead of helping his son who was begging for help, Kotaro grabbed a pair of pruning shears and hit his son across the face. This time, Tenko, completely furious, ran straight at his dad and intended to kill him. When he touched his father's face, his quirk kicked in, and the decay spread, completely destroying the house. After losing his family, Tenko aimlessly wandered the streets, desperate for someone to help him, but people were too freaked out by how he looked to even get close. That's when All For One found him, telling him he's there to help, and took him in. All For One then used Tenko's anger and hatred to mold him into Tomura Shigaraki, encouraging him to embrace his destructive urges and forget everything about his past. Eventually, Tomura would lead the League of Villains, becoming the terrifying symbol of fear, all thanks to All For One's manipulation. All For One and his twin brother, Yoichi, were born in a chaotic time before quirks were widely known, and their mother died during childbirth as their abilities drained her life. Right after birth, All For One's quirk activated, letting him steal her ability and consume her body. Despite abusing his younger brother Yoichi, he kept him close, treating him like a possession. Years later, as quirks became public knowledge, society spiraled into chaos. All For One thrived in the turmoil, stealing powers and amassing followers to become a feared ruler. Inspired by villainous comics, he adopted the name All For One, and dreamed of shaping the world for himself. Yoichi, driven by heroism, resisted him, but was imprisoned and forcefully given a quirk, which fused with Yoichi's own to create One For All. However, Yoichi was later rescued by vigilantes, but All For One tracked them down and killed his brother. But Yoichi's blood, which splattered over Kudo, caused One For All to transfer into his body. When All For One went to kill Kudo, he had already transferred it to his brother Bruce. Over centuries, All For One hunted One For All and its successors, while scheming to one day rule over the world. Which villain had the saddest backstory? Comment down below. Thanks for watching, and watch this video next.